A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corin. So I'm beginning my mission to get my friends interested in this podcast. And so I'm going to send in a few prompts covering topics that I know are of interest to them. And as we've been talking about medication and neurodivergence and all these associated topics today, I thought this would be a good one to sideload onto these conversations because the same friend who's interested in Guanfacine or is using Guanfacine, I know is also struggling with long COVID. And to be honest, I know almost nothing about this subject, but I'm intrigued to know exactly why it happens. So I think we've seen these kind of long syndromes before with other viruses. The classic one that seems to sort of defy medical explanation, but have some strong indications of association with specific viruses is chronic fatigue syndrome or CFS. And for coronavirus, I recall when the pandemic was just breaking out, one of the things that before there was kind of much of a scientific understanding about it, as an asthmatic, I was really worried that it would be like this, it would be devastating. And then the data started trickling in that asthmatics didn't really have so much to worry about. The outcomes weren't that much worse. And then we got the virus and kind of moved on with our happy lives. I think I caught COVID a couple of times. And the virus, some of the viruses, the shots were a bit rough, but overall, I emerged from it pretty much as I was before. But some people have had much harder courses. They've had COVID and had lasting and really debilitating effects, especially breathlessness and difficulties with the respiratory system. And I'm really interested to know about that. There was this huge fear back when the pandemic was the topic on everyone's lips, that the virus could actually cause not just, mortality that we thankfully didn't see, but that there'd be this kind of secondary wave of people who were debilitated or disabled because of the virus and lasting effects. So I'm really interested to know, Herman and Corin, now that the pandemic stage of things has abated and there's been more data available. What do we know about long COVID? Is it an established diagnosis already? And for those who are struggling with it, how does it differ from things like chronic fatigue syndrome or other syndromes we've seen associated with viral illnesses or otherwise? And is there any treatment that works for those who have been really affected by it? Herman and Corin, I'd love to chat about the quiet pandemic, or rather the pandemic that just kind of faded out to quiet very quickly and left a lot of unresolved and open questions. I think that we can get into some of those in future episodes, like how equipped are we for the next pandemic? But let's just chat today about the lasting effects of the first one. What have we learned so far about the phenomenon of long COVID? How many are affected worldwide? And how are treatments looking for that population?
So, you know how everyone seems to have collectively decided that the pandemic is ancient history? We have moved on to new crises, new headlines, and yet, for a massive segment of the population, the pandemic never actually ended. It just changed shape. It is now February of 2026, and while the rest of the world is arguing about the latest AI regulations or the upcoming elections, there is this quiet, persistent reality for millions of people that the emergency is still happening inside their own bodies every single day.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are absolutely right, Corn. It is this shadow pandemic that is still unfolding in the background of our daily lives. We are living in a world that wants to forget, but the biology of the virus has a much longer memory than our news cycles. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that. He is asking us to dive into the current state of long COVID now that we are in 2026 and have several years of robust, peer-reviewed data to look back on. He wants to know if the fog has cleared, both literally and figuratively.
It is a heavy one, but such an important topic. Daniel mentioned that he has friends who are still struggling with it, specifically dealing with things like breathlessness and neurological issues. He is curious about where the science stands now. Is it an official diagnosis? How many people are we talking about globally? And what does the treatment landscape look like today? Because for a long time, it felt like patients were just shouting into a void. But it feels like the void is finally starting to talk back with some actual answers.
It is fascinating because Daniel's prompt highlights something we have seen throughout history, but often ignored. These post-viral syndromes aren't new, but the scale of this one is unprecedented. We are finally at a point where the data is robust enough to start answering some of those why questions that were so mysterious back in 2021 and 2022. We have moved from the observation phase into the mechanistic phase, where we are actually seeing the gears of the disease turning under the microscope.
I think we should start with the scale of the problem. When we talk about how many people are affected worldwide, what are the numbers looking like now that the dust has somewhat settled? I remember early on, people were throwing around all sorts of percentages, but now that we have standardized the tracking, what is the real human cost?
The numbers are staggering. Corn. Current estimates from the World Health Organization and the major meta-analyses released in late 2025 suggest that roughly 10 to 20% of people who contracted COVID-19 went on to develop some form of long COVID. If you look at the global infection rates, we are talking about well over 65 million people worldwide living with these lingering symptoms. Some studies, particularly those coming out of the European Union, even push that number higher, closer to 80 million depending on how you define the severity of the condition.
65 million. That is more than the entire population of the United Kingdom or France. It is almost hard to wrap your head around that level of collective disability. It is like an entire major G7 nation just went on sick leave and never came back. And when we say long COVID, what are we actually defining it as in 2026? Is there a standardized clinical definition now that doctors can actually put on a chart without getting a side eye from the insurance companies?
There is much more consensus than there used to be. The World Health Organization defines it as post-COVID-19 condition, occurring in individuals with a history of probable or confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection, usually 3 months from the onset of COVID-19, with symptoms that last for at least 2 months and cannot be explained by an alternative diagnosis. In 2024, we finally got specific ICD-11 codes that allow for much better tracking. The common symptoms include fatigue, shortness of breath, and cognitive dysfunction, which people often call brain fog. But we now recognize over 200 different symptoms across multiple organ systems.
I remember when brain fog was treated as this vague, almost psychological complaint, like people were just stressed or burnt out from the lockdowns. But the research has really moved past that, hasn't it? It is not just feeling a bit tired or forgetting where you put your keys.
Oh, absolutely not. We have seen clear physiological markers now. In fact, one of the most significant breakthroughs in the last couple of years has been the identification of what we call viral persistence. This is the idea that the virus, or at least pieces of it, like the spike protein or viral RNA, can linger in reservoirs in the body long after the initial infection is cleared from the respiratory tract. Researchers have found viral fragments in the gut, in the bone marrow, and even in the brain tissue of long COVID patients months or years later. It is not a post-viral syndrome in the sense that the virus is gone. It is more like a persistent viral syndrome for a lot of people.
So it is like the body is fighting a ghost. The main battle is over, the headlines have moved on, but there are still these little pockets of resistance that keep the immune system in a state of high alert. It is like a war that officially ended, but there are still soldiers in the jungle who haven't been told to stand down.
And that leads to the second major mechanism we have identified, chronic inflammation and immune dysregulation. In many patients, the immune system gets stuck in a pro-inflammatory state. It is like a fire department that won't leave the house and return to the station even after the fire is out. They keep spraying water, and eventually, the water starts damaging the furniture and the floorboards. That is what is happening to the body's tissues. We see elevated levels of cytokines and even autoantibodies, where the body starts attacking its own healthy cells because it is so confused by the persistent viral signals.
That is our first analogy for the day, folks. One down, one to go. But it is a good one, Herman. It explains why the symptoms are so systemic. It is not just one organ, it is the whole environment of the body. It is the plumbing, the wiring, and the foundation all being affected at once.
Right. And then there is the vascular component. This is something that really interested Daniel in his prompt. Why are people still breathless? Why is their heart racing just from walking to the kitchen? We have seen significant evidence of microclots. These are tiny, fibrin-rich clots that are too small to be seen on a standard CT scan or MRI, but they can block the smallest capillaries. They are often amyloid-like, meaning they are very difficult for the body to break down naturally.
If those capillaries are blocked, the oxygen can't get to the muscles or the brain efficiently. That explains the profound fatigue and the air hunger people describe, even when their lungs look clear on an X-ray. It is not that the lungs aren't taking in air, it is that the air can't get to the end users in the body.
Precisely. It is a plumbing issue at the microscopic level. Imagine a plumbing system where tiny bits of debris have settled into the most distant pipes. The main pump might be working fine, but the water just isn't reaching the garden hose at the end of the line. The pressure is there, the water is in the tank, but the delivery system is compromised.
And that is analogy number 2. We are at the limit, everyone. From here on out, it is straight science. But I think those two really help frame the why. You have viral persistence, an overactive immune system, and microscopic circulatory issues. It is a triple threat.
Those are the big three. There is also mitochondrial dysfunction, which we have learned a lot more about in the last 18 months. The energy-producing parts of our cells basically go into a low-power mode to protect themselves from the inflammation. It is a biological safe mode that the body can't seem to reboot from. When you try to push through it, you aren't just tired, you are literally running out of cellular fuel.
I want to touch on something Daniel asked about the relationship between long COVID and other syndromes like chronic fatigue syndrome, or MECFS. For a long time, the MECFS community has been saying, hey, we have been dealing with this for decades. How do they compare now that we have more data in 2026? Are they the same thing or just cousins?
The overlap is massive. In fact, many experts now consider a significant subset of long COVID cases to be a form of MECFS triggered by the coronavirus. We have seen post-viral syndromes after the 1918 flu, after the original SARS in 2003, and after Epstein-Barr virus. The symptoms are nearly identical. Post-exertional malaise, which is that crash after even minor physical or mental effort, unrefreshing sleep, and orthostatic intolerance, where your heart rate spikes just from standing up. The difference is that long COVID gave us a massive synchronized cohort to study all at once.
It feels like long COVID has forced the medical establishment to finally take these other conditions seriously. Because suddenly, you didn't just have a few thousand people complaining about it, you had millions. It is harder to dismiss a problem when it starts impacting the global labor market and the GDP.
That is the silver lining, if you can call it that. The massive influx of funding through programs like the Recover Initiative in the United States and similar programs in the UK and Australia has accelerated our understanding of post-viral illness by decades. We are learning things about the autonomic nervous system that we simply didn't prioritize before 2020. We are finally seeing that these invisible illnesses have very visible biological footprints if you know where to look.
Let's talk about that autonomic nervous system piece, because that leads into the treatment side of Daniel's question. He specifically mentioned Guanfacine in his audio prompt. I know that is a medication traditionally used for ADHD or high blood pressure, but how does it fit into the long COVID puzzle? It seems like a weird leap from a blood pressure med to a viral recovery tool.
It is a great catch by Daniel. Guanfacine is an alpha-2A adrenoceptor agonist. In the context of brain fog, researchers at Yale found that it can help strengthen the connections in the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for executive function and working memory. When you have that chronic inflammation we talked about, it can weaken those neural connections. Guanfacine basically helps turn up the volume on those signals, making it easier for patients to focus and process information. It is like putting a signal booster on a weak Wi-Fi connection.
Is it a silver bullet, though? Or is it more of a your mileage may vary situation? Because I think people are desperate for a one-size-fits-all cure, but it doesn't sound like this is it.
Definitely the latter. It is often paired with an antioxidant called N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, to address the oxidative stress in the brain. For some patients, it is life-changing. For others, it doesn't do much. This is the core challenge of long COVID treatment in 2026. It is not one disease. It is a collection of different subphenotypes. We are moving toward a model where we have to diagnose the driver for each individual.
So, one person might have the viral persistence version, another has the microclot version, and another has the autoimmune version. And if you give them all the same pill, you are going to get very mixed results.
And if you treat a microclot patient with an ADHD med, you might help their focus slightly, but you aren't fixing the underlying oxygen delivery problem. This is why the long COVID clinics that have popped up are so essential. They have to do this incredibly detailed detective work to figure out which mechanism is driving the symptoms for that specific individual. We are seeing the rise of precision medicine for chronic illness.
What about other treatments? I've heard a lot about low-dose naltrexone and even things like apheresis, where they actually filter the blood. That sounds very sci-fi and a little bit intense.
Low-dose naltrexone, or LDN, is very popular right now. It is used as an off-label treatment to dampen neuroinflammation. It basically tells the brain's immune cells, the microglia, to calm down. Then you have things like Paxlovid trials. Some studies are looking at whether a longer course of antivirals, 15 or even 30 days, can clear those viral reservoirs we mentioned earlier.
Herman, are you there?
Oh, Mum, I am actually recording the show right now. Can this wait? We are right in the middle of the medical section.
I am so sorry, Bubbler. I didn't mean to interrupt your little radio program. I just wanted to tell you I left a nice container of mushroom barley soup by your door. Don't let it sit out too long. It will get a film on it. You need your nutrients, especially with all this talk about viruses.
Thanks, Mum. I will grab it as soon as we are done. I am literally in the middle of a sentence about neuroinflammation and microglia.
Oh, that sounds very serious. Is that why your brother never calls me back? Does he have the neuroinflammation? Or is he just being a typical man?
Hi, Dorothy. No, I am just bad at checking my phone. I promise I will call you tonight. I don't think I have neuroinflammation, just a bad case of forgetting to charge my phone.
Such a good boy. Okay, Herman, don't forget the soup. And remember to bring back my Tupperware, the blue one with the lid that actually fits. I need it for the brisket on Friday. Goodbye, sweethearts. Stay healthy.
Goodbye, Mum. Sorry about that, Corn. Where were we? It is hard to stay on the topic of microscopic pathology when there is mushroom barley soup involved.
I believe you were talking about the blue lid mechanism of viral persistence. No, wait. We were on blood filtering and antivirals. You were mentioning apheresis.
Right. Apheresis. That is the process of filtering those microclots and inflammatory proteins out of the blood. It is controversial because it is very expensive and invasive, and we still don't have large-scale randomized controlled trials proving its long-term efficacy. But for some patients who are desperate, they are seeing temporary relief. The real goal, though, is to find a way to stop the clots from forming in the first place, rather than just cleaning them out after the fact.
It feels like we are in this middle ground, where we have identified the parts of the problem, but we haven't quite found the master switch yet. We are fixing the leaks and patching the wires, but we haven't figured out how to reset the whole circuit breaker.
That is a perfect way to put it. We are seeing progress in rehabilitation as well. But it is not the kind of rehab people think of. In the early days, doctors told patients to just exercise more, which turned out to be disastrous for people with post-exertional malaise. It actually made them worse, sometimes permanently.
I remember that. It was called graded exercise therapy, and it was the standard for ME/CFS for years until the patients finally convinced the medical community that it was harmful. It is scary to think that the standard medical advice was actually causing more damage.
Now, in 2026, the focus is on pacing. It is about staying within your energy envelope. We are seeing wearable technology play a huge role here. Patients use heart rate monitors and Oura rings to make sure they don't cross a certain threshold that would trigger a crash. It is a very data-driven way of living, which I think Daniel would appreciate given his tech background. You are basically managing your body like a battery.
It is like having a smartphone battery that only charges to 20% every night. You have to be incredibly careful about how you spend every single percentage point. Do I use 5% on a shower? Do I use 10% on a phone call? If I go over 20, the whole thing shuts down for 3 days.
Precisely. And in 2026, we are seeing some interesting developments in vagus nerve stimulation. The vagus nerve is the main highway for the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system. Many long COVID patients have an overactive fight or flight response. Small devices that stimulate the vagus nerve through the ear or the neck can help pull the body back into a state of calm, which allows for better healing. It is like a manual override for the nervous system.
That is fascinating. It is almost like a hardware hack for the human body. We are moving from chemical interventions to electrical ones.
It really is. And it ties back to what we discussed in episode 800 about decoding medical data. The more we can quantify these subtle shifts in the autonomic nervous system, the better we can target the treatments. We are moving away from one-size-fits-all to precision medicine for post-viral syndromes. We are even seeing AI models that can predict a crash before it happens based on heart rate variability data.
I want to go back to the breathlessness Daniel mentioned. For his friend who is struggling with that, even when their lungs look okay on a scan, what is the latest on that? Is it just the microclots, or is there something else happening with the diaphragm or the nerves? Because that air hunger sounds terrifying.
It is often a combination. There is a condition called dysautonomia, specifically POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. When the autonomic nervous system is misfiring, it doesn't coordinate the heart rate and the breathing properly. So, even if your lungs are getting enough air, your brain thinks you aren't because the blood isn't being pumped to the right places at the right time. There is also evidence that the virus can affect the phrenic nerve, which controls the diaphragm.
So your breathing muscle is basically getting weak or garbled signals from the brain. It is like a laggy internet connection between the router and the device.
Right. The data is there, the air is in the room, but it is not arriving in time to keep things running smoothly. This is why breathing retraining has become a big part of long COVID therapy, not because the lungs are broken, but because the software controlling the breathing needs a reboot. We are seeing specialized physical therapists who focus entirely on this neurological aspect of respiration.
We actually touched on something adjacent to this back in episode 5097 when we talked about software glitches in the gut. It seems like a recurring theme with these complex conditions. The hardware might be mostly intact, but the signaling pathways are a mess. It is a communication breakdown within the body.
That is exactly right. And we shouldn't overlook the psychological and societal impact. When you have millions of people who were previously healthy and are now unable to work or participate in life, that creates a massive economic and social strain. We are seeing a shift in how disability is viewed. It is no longer just, can you walk or can you see? It is, can you maintain cognitive focus for 4 hours a day? Or can you stand up for 10 minutes without your heart rate hitting 140?
It is a rethink of what productivity looks like in a post-pandemic world. And unfortunately, a lot of people are being left behind because our systems, insurance, disability benefits, workplace accommodations haven't caught up to the reality of long COVID. We are still using a 20th century definition of disability for a 21st century problem.
That is the quiet pandemic Daniel was talking about. It is the millions of people who are still at home, still struggling, while the rest of the world has moved on. But the research is finally catching up. We are seeing trials for monoclonal antibodies, specifically for long COVID. We are seeing trials for immunoadsorption. The sheer volume of science happening right now is the most hopeful part of this story. We have more clinical trials for long COVID right now than we had for almost any other chronic condition in the previous decade.
What would you say to someone like Daniel's friend, or anyone listening who is in the thick of this right now? What is the state of the union for a long COVID patient in February of 2026? Is there more hope now than there was 2 years ago?
I would say that the gaslighting phase of the illness is largely over. That is a huge win. You are no longer fighting to prove that you are sick. The medical community, for the most part, acknowledges this is a physiological, multisystemic condition. The second thing is, don't give up on finding your specific type. If the first 3 things you tried didn't work, it might just mean they weren't targeting your specific driver, whether that is microclots, viral persistence, or autoimmunity. We have more tools in the toolbox now than we ever have.
And keep an eye on the research coming out of the MECFS world. Those 2 communities are now inextricably linked. A win for one is a win for the other.
They are, and that is a good thing for everyone. The knowledge exchange is happening faster than ever. We are also seeing the rise of patient-led research. Some of the best data we have on long COVID comes from patients who are also scientists or data analysts who started tracking their own symptoms when the medical system failed them. They are the ones who identified the microclot issue before many doctors even knew what to look for.
It is a very democratic way of doing science. It is messy, it is grassroots, but it is fast. It is bypassing the traditional 10-year delay between discovery and clinical practice.
It is. And honestly, it is the only way we were going to make progress on something this complex in such a short amount of time. We have learned more about post-viral syndromes in the last 5 years than we did in the previous 50. We are finally looking at the whole human again, rather than just individual organs in isolation.
That is a powerful thought. It is a tragedy that it took a global pandemic to get us here, but the knowledge we are gaining will help people far beyond just those with COVID-19. It will help people with Lyme disease, with fibromyalgia, with all these invisible illnesses that have been pushed to the margins for way too long. We are building a new map of the human immune system.
We are finally decoding the global language of health, as we called it in episode 800. We are learning that the body's response to a virus is just as important as the virus itself. The host response is where the real story of chronic illness is written.
So, to recap for Daniel, long COVID is very much an established diagnosis now, with its own clinical codes and specialized clinics. The numbers are around 65 to 80 million globally. The mechanisms are likely a combination of viral persistence, microclots, and immune dysregulation. And while there isn't one single cure yet, the treatment landscape is expanding into everything from neuroinflammatory meds like Guanfacine to blood filtering and vagus nerve stimulation.
And pacing. Never underestimate the power of pacing. It is the most effective tool we have right now for managing the day-to-day. It is not about giving up. It is about strategizing.
Well, this has been a deep dive, but a necessary one. I feel like I have a much clearer picture of why this has been so hard to pin down. It is not one thing, it is a systemic cascade. It is a domino effect, where the dominoes are still falling for some people.
It really is. And I think we are going to see some major breakthroughs in the next year or two as those longer-term Paxlovid and monoclonal antibody trials start reporting their final results. We are on the cusp of some very targeted therapies.
I hope so. For the sake of those 65 million people, we really need those answers. We can't just leave an entire generation of people behind because their illness is complicated.
We do. And hey, if you are listening and you have been through this, or you are still in it, we see you. You aren't crazy, you aren't just stressed, and the science is finally starting to back you up. The data is on your side now.
Well said, Herman. And on that note, I think we should wrap things up. If you found this episode helpful, or if you know someone who is struggling with long COVID, please share it with them. We want this information to get to the people who need it most. Knowledge is the first step toward recovery.
And if you have a moment, a quick review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts really helps the show reach more people. We genuinely appreciate the support from our community. It keeps us digging into these weird and wonderful prompts.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for our full archive, including those related episodes we mentioned today. If you want to get in touch or send us your own prompt, you can use the contact form on the site or email us at show@myweirdprompts.com. We love hearing from you.
And a big thank you to Daniel for sending this in. It is a topic that hits close to home for so many of us, and it was great to finally look at the long-term data from 2026. It gives us a perspective we just didn't have a few years ago.
Thanks, Daniel. Our show music, as always, was generated with Suno. This has been My Weird Prompts.
I am Herman Poppleberry, and I'm going to go find that soup before it gets a film on it. I can hear the mushroom barley calling my name.
And I'm going to call Dorothy so I don't get in trouble. I don't want to be the reason for a neuroinflammation. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth.